All right. Oh, let one more person in. All right. Well, welcome to What's Your Diversity? Again, my name is Taj Smith, and I serve as the Director of Diversity Education, and I will serve as today's facilitator. We have two RIT Rochester employees that have joined us today to share a little bit about themselves. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly, but for those who are new, just to give you a rundown on how this usually goes, um, our storytellers, our guests will share and respond to questions that I ask them. And that should take about 30 to 40 minutes of our time together. And then after that's done, you all as the audience members will have the opportunity to ask them follow-up questions related to what they've covered. They do have the right to not answer questions if they feel it's too personal or for whatever reason they don't want to answer it, just as a heads up. But we do invite you to ask questions through the chat or unmute yourself in voice or get the attention of the interpreter so we can have your thoughts and perspective communicated. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Sarah to start us off with an introduction, and then we'll move to Camille.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Gaudioso. I identify as genderqueer, gender fluid, femme, non-binary. Those may or may not be some terms you know, but it means that I use she and they pronouns. So when people talk about me, I like it when they mix it up and use a little bit of both. I'm from here in Rochester. I grew up in Webster, and I've been working here at RIT for almost 2 years now.
Thank you. Camille?
Hi, my name is Camille or Cami. Either one's fine. My name is Sis. I was born in South Korea and adopted at 7 months old. I was adopted by a white family in the Chicago area. That's where I grew up. I was identified as deaf when I was 15 months old. So I was already in America for several months at that point. I grew up signing and talking in SimCom, and I still do that now today. I went to RIT for undergrad. I studied biomedical science. I went to Johns Hopkins University for my master's degree in microbiology. I started a PhD program at the University of Pittsburgh, but I found that bench research in me was not a good fit. So I started teaching instead, and I've been at RIT for, this is my 7th year, if I'm counting right.
Thank you. All right, so my first question is going to ask Camille and Sarah to describe home. Tell us a little bit about home. Now, I recognize home can be complicated for some people depending on their life journey and background, or it can be a very positive thing. And so I invite you to share what you feel comfortable with as you define home. And then the follow-up to that is, how does home, if you're not from this current area, how does that compare to back home? And either of you can start.
Well, I guess I'll go for it. Home has ways of changing and ways of staying the same for me. My family is pretty close-knit, and I have 4 siblings. The oldest one is the only one who doesn't live here in the Rochester area. She teaches biochemistry at Ohio State. So my family's very close, and I have a definite sense of home. The family home that I grew up in, they still live in Webster, and are definitely my rock. But I also think about a lot of different things. Well, for instance, I went through a breakup this past year, and my relationship was 13 years long, and we lived in the same house for over 9 years. So home changed pretty significantly for me last year when I moved into an apartment. I lived by myself again. So a lot of things that change. And I also always think about like the queer community and, you know, my my friends that are my family, the people who, you know, even though I'm really close with my family, there are still other people who, friends that I can communicate with and share life experiences with, and they might understand some of them a little
Home for me is a complicated subject because, you know, I was born in South Korea, so I feel a strong connection to that home. I don't remember much. I did visit when I was 11 or 12, but my memories are not strong. I don't have that family. We have a few friends. My two younger brothers are also both adopted from South Korea. And so my family has made a point of having Korean food, some traditions as much as we could with our Midwest lifestyle. So I do feel home. If someone were to ask me where I'm from, I'm always, do I say, well, I was born in Korea. I grew up near Chicago. I live in Rochester. So I always give all three answers because I feel that connection of heritage to Korea. Growing up, Chicago, if you want to know what Chicago is like, they have more snow than we do right now. I just saw a tweet this morning. They have a dump truck in every neighborhood getting rid of snow. And then Rochester is home now. My parents were divorced a few years ago. My mom moved here to be with me, which has been wonderful. So here really feels like home. Also, the deaf community here, wow, there is no other like that in the world that I know of. So really, home is where I feel there are people with my shared experiences, people that I love, people that love me or put up with me. So that's how I view home.
Thank you both. Appreciate that. All right. The next set of questions are, how do you define diversity? And has that definition changed over the course of your lifetime?
Do you want to go first this time?
Sure, why not? Diversity to me is more about experiences. It does have to do with who you are, what you look like, your genetics, being a biologist. I think a lot about DNA and how that dictates your appearance, which will affect how others treat you, which will affect how you experience the world. My experience is obviously not the same as anyone. So we all have different experiences that we bring, whether that's based on our DNA or not. That's another interesting conversation to have. Yes, but I like to think of diversity as experience.
I think that the definition of diversity has changed a lot over my life. It used to be very simplistic and sort of usually focused on skin color, outward appearance differences. Now it's so much broader, and I find it's a little bit harder for me to define, because to me, diversity is meaningless without action. So diversity has to have some action, because there are some areas that we need help in diversifying spaces, and making, granting people access, and not making assumptions about people. So I also think it's nuance. I mean, it's everybody's bodies and brains, culture, sexuality, gender. It's it's important to learn outside of ourselves and think about life from more than just our own perspective. That ties into diversity for me.
Thank you both. So the next question is, how has diversity influenced your personal and or professional life?
You want to go first this time?
Sure. Um, Wonderfully, it has influenced my life. Not enough. It has influenced my life. I mean, there are a lot of aspects of where I grew up that didn't seem very diverse. Sometimes, again, that's really the lies that we tell each other and the assumptions that we make about each other. Culturally, we learn how to do that, and we don't always realize how much we do it. So I feel that I've tried to be an advocate for diversity in my personal life. And I debated whether I could really say that, but it has been intentional action. I have tried, sometimes I have not, it can be scary to speak up about things in real time, in real life, but uh, to me, it is important to try to do so intentionally, respectfully, um, just, to learn to share cultures and customs and to, yeah, sure, we're all different, but we are all so similar. And if we took a little more time to let people be more diverse, to be themselves, not worry so much if you're going outside of gender roles or if you're, um, whatever. We all know there's a laundry list of examples there. I think um, it's a richer life experience.
I think diversity has really affected me in ways that I have struggled with putting into words. Part of me has always felt in the middle. So, for example, in America, with our racial situation, a lot of people talk about you have the white on one end, you have the black on the other end, and everyone in the middle sometimes gets forgotten, especially as an Asian with the model minority myth, where, even though I definitely don't face the same issue as the Black community by far, I still have some experiences in America because of racial pressure. And then also, as I call myself little d deaf because I use voice still. That's my primary mode of communication with my family. We talk, my whole family is hearing. So, as the person who speaks and hears decently well, perfect, no, not by far. But I'm also not fully deaf, not fully immersed in the big D deaf community. So kind of feeling like in the middle, I feel I've been able to step back a little bit and look on both ends because I'm not at either, I'm in the middle. So that's my personal life. I've tried to, as much as possible, be involved with diversity related things at work. Why? Because I see a lot of students coming in with very little exposure to diversity. Many of our students come in from smaller towns or smaller communities where they don't meet people with different political beliefs, seems to be a huge one in recent years. And so I definitely try to bring in as much training as possible, think about it when I'm making my class materials, and really try to put in that effort. It's extra work sometimes. Yes, it's tough to find stock images that are diverse sometimes. But I think just being aware that if I'm looking through my PowerPoint lecture, everyone looks the same or everyone acts the same, then I try to step back and go, okay, and try to find something that's more inclusive of our world today.
Thank you both. So I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball. I'm gonna ask you a question that I didn't prep you with.
Ooh.
um, and only answer it if you feel comfortable. Um, how have you overcome any challenges that you might have faced as a result of your diversities?
Um, okay, well, I have, I just came out to my family as genderqueer, um, actually in last September 2020. So, and I did so because I finally realized how important it was to me, and I needed to let them in, and I also needed to be able to feel safe to do more public, to be me publicly. Like I really wanted to be able to do that. And so some unique challenges that are new to me are coming forward, because, well, lots of things, like the world will always see me as a woman. There's just absolutely very little that I can, and that I'm not interested in trying to correct that every moment of every day and every interaction. You know, I mean, but you start to, these things start to happen where you have to accept how people will look at you and not know the things about you, which I don't know if it's just me or not, but parts of that have become more profound in this sort of new leg of my journey. And it can be really difficult because a lot of times people reach out with the nicest of intentions, and sometimes the nicest intentions are hurtful, really, really hurtful. And that's, you know, there's just, for me, it's sort of new, and I'm really, it's a new thing for me to think about and balance out, and how to, you know, and people, if you've heard people talk about, do you have the spoons for that? You know, do you have the spoons to explain, you know, well, why does it say she and they? Do you have the spoons to explain that over and over every day, kind of thing? That's the kind of stuff that I think.
So I'm very, very extroverted. I love people. I love meeting new people, talking to people. I like to try to find common ground first before any of those questions can be asked. Um, like Sarah said, often people mean so well. They are genuinely curious. Sometimes, you know, the spoons we don't have that many spoons. No one has unlimited spoons. So I try to find that common ground. Rochester fortunately gives us one that's easy to talk about year round, the weather. Very easy to make that connection with people personally. Um, so that's one way that I try to address, to find some of those common interests, make us equal on some level first, and then we can introduce the things that make us different.
Thank you both. All right, I'm gonna go back to the script now. All right, so we have one more question remaining. So those of you in the audience participating in that way, get those questions ready. Feel free again to type those in the chat, or to share those using your voice, or to get the attention of the interpreter so we can have your words, your perspective communicated. All right, so my last question is, could you recommend any resources that could help us learn about diversity in general that you found helpful, or specific diversities that you represent? Any resources. They could be Netflix, you know, shows, books, podcasts, cultural activities. So any of those would be appreciated. So.
I have so many. I will focus on the Korean adoptee experience because, well, Netflix recently released Deaf You, which a lot of people have strong opinions about. there are so many resources for deaf people, and I feel RIT does a pretty good job of making those available. Going back to the Korean experience, on Netflix, I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas lately. The Korean wave in American pop culture has been awesome for me. I've been loving it. Korean food is everywhere now. There's one drama called Mr. Sunshine. It's a historical drama related to when the Japanese first invaded Korea back in 1910, or no, I think it was like 1890. It was when they first showed up. And then it showed how the Japanese slowly took over to full occupation in 1910. And that lasted until the end of the Korean War in the 50s. I think a lot of Americans don't know about the Japanese occupation and how awful it really was. Then there's another movie. It was on Netflix a few years ago. I'm not sure if it's still there, but it's called Twinsters. It's about two identical Korean girls who were both adopted separately at birth. They grew up in different countries. One was in Europe. I can't remember where. One was in America. And through the magic of YouTube, they found each other. So they go through DNA testing. They go back to Korea to try to find out more about their family. Wow, that was really a powerful movie for me. Last one, there's a book. I don't know how widely available it is. It's called I Wish for You a Beautiful Life. It's a compilation of letters from, well, a little context. In South Korea, being an unwed mother is not socially acceptable. Family is huge in East Asian cultures. So if you're an unwed mother, many of them are sent to a home to stay until the baby's born, for adoption, and then they can come home and never talk about it again sometimes. So this book, One Home, compiled letters from mothers who were living there pregnant, waiting for the baby to be born. They wrote letters to their babies. Wow, really powerful book also. So those three, again, wonderful resources, I think.
What was, may I ask, Camille, what was the name of the movie about the twins?
Twinsters.
Thank you. I'm a big NPR fan. There are tons of podcasts like Throughline or Code Switch. White Lies was a big eye opener. I also our local connections with Evan Dawson. We have a show participant right here with us. Taj was on Connections with Evan Dawson once. But I don't always love Evan Dawson, but I do appreciate how many different voices he tries to bring in. Locally, we also have a podcast called Transformation Thursday. Two of the transgender women prominent in our community have that podcast, and I love podcasts. I like to listen to things while I work or clean or whatever. Netflix has a documentary called Disclosure, Laverne Cox and many transgender people worked together on that. I think it's imperative. I also, as I say all this, I think it's so important to educate ourselves, but also not just the trauma experience of people who aren't like us. See their joy, see their lives, see the rich humanity, it is important, it's absolutely, in my opinion, educating yourself is imperative. You must work to understand some history, some culture, current events. But at the same time, if you're only looking about bad things that happen to people, you don't know the whole story. And well, actually, I'll stop there. NPR podcast.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. And just to react to the last thing you said, Sarah, I think that's, so true. So I appreciate that wisdom of not just focusing on the trauma, but looking at the joy. And one of those examples for me as a cisgendered identified person and heterosexual person, having gone to my first drag show years ago, and being in that space, it was so much joy, so much high energy, positivity, people being authentic. And I felt welcome there, even though I was like different in that, and then the minority in that context. So, but that wasn't the image that I had before I went to a drag show. Before that, it was all negative. And so when we do try things out, I do think that, you see that joy that you're talking about. So thanks for sharing that. All right, so we do have a few questions. I'm going to start with one that was sent to me in private. So the first question is for Camille. How do deaf, big D, community treat you as a hard of hearing person? Ever had issues of bullying from that community because you can talk?
I've been lucky that I haven't had a lot of negative experiences. Part of that is because my ASL is improving. I can turn off and sign pretty well, improved a lot thanks to the Rochester, the RNT student community. I'm able to work well with the big D community, so it's been mostly a positive experience. I did experience some negativity when I was an undergrad at RIT. I was dating the guy who was big D deaf. We broke up for a multitude of reasons. But he felt his perspective was because I got my first cochlear implant. I had hearing aids growing up. He felt the cochlear implant changed me. I don't think it did, but it's interesting that someone that close to me could view that. It's a huge difference in my personal life. I've noticed those who are excluded from the big D community, their ASL skills are weaker, not weaker, but less experienced. Because I have so many deaf friends and I work with deaf students all day, my ASL is, we're getting there. So I've just been very fortunate that way.
Thank you. All right, next question is for Sarah. Did you struggle to find your identity while living in the town of Webster before you came out to your family?
That is a really good question. Thanks, Kay. Yes and no. I have a big personality. I am a person who is not shy. I've got a bit of a, it's for better or for worse, I feel like I understand justice and want to see it. So there were many ways, like I was out, my friends all knew that I was bisexual. In school, I felt reasonably accepted. Within my group, we all, sometimes you have to find your people. And so, our identities, every person, I think your identity changes and changes, right? Like you're going through life, having experiences, things happen, and little bits change, some things stay the same over time. But I've been pretty lucky that in a lot of ways that strong personality can protect me in ways sometimes, because as much as I have definitely struggled, I manage to have a voice that says inside of me, like, you're doing okay. This, I don't know how to describe it, because I do. I mean, I have pretty bad struggles at times, but still manage to have a certain basis where I say, no, I understand that this is real. I am me. I am valid. People like me are valid. And so there has been some protection in that aspect of me.
Thank you. All right, next question is for Camille. Did you learn Korean language, both spoken and sign language?
I was lucky. I grew up in a university town. So there was a large enough Korean student population that there was a Korean church in that town where they spoke full Korean. They had what we call Korean school on Saturdays. So every Saturday, my brothers and I would go, we would learn the language, the alphabet, food, dance, culture, songs. A wonderful experience. I can read the alphabet phonetically, and I know a few words, but Korean is a complicated language. Many East Asian languages, you speak one way to an elder, you speak a different way with peers and to younger siblings or whatever. So learning it is just, it's amazing. I tried Duolingo recently, but again, I just can sound it out, but translate, I can't do that. Koreans have their own sign language, it's totally different from ours. It's amazing. I've never learned, but what I love is the Korean news, their videos, they always have an interpreter, the little inset box. So watching them, and with some European sign language, I can understand, but with the Korean, I don't understand any of it. So it's a cool experience just to watch and see that.
Thank you. All right, we've got another question here. Thanking you both for sharing. So the question is, how do you both feel that the RIT community is doing with supporting people with diverse identities? What, if anything, would you like to see changed or improved?
Well, I'll tackle that one, because overall, I think the RIT community is great. There are really a lot of wonderful aspects to being here. But I don't think anything's perfect or done. There's always work to do. So I think individuals, for the most part, do a pretty good job. I do have I have contacted HR and have tried to talk about certain things, and I hope these conversations will continue. Like in SIS, my gender is now listed as strictly something that is not. And with, in these Zoom calls, every time I'm in the Zoom call, I have to change my screen name to reflect the she, they pronouns, because that's important to me. And I recently went and tried to make it default to that. And I can't, but perhaps that's my technical inability, but I don't know how to, I'm pretty sure that I followed the steps, and I don't think that there's currently a way to do that. And like our diversity dashboard, I struggle a little bit with some of the things that go on that still constantly default to the binary. It's a constant, I've had some conversations with the gender studies department, because, there was a gender in politics presentation that I thought would be great to see. And I found out it really only focused on women. there were more transgender people in politics in 2020 than ever before, out transgender people. So, I thought it was, I said, I thought it would have been more important to try to make it much more clear that, to talk about, there was like a quick disclaimer in the beginning, and even the disclaimer sort of implied that sex is binary, and that's why we were going to use those statistics. And I have a lot of trouble with that as a human being who understands the reality that we live in. So those are some things I hope to continue to see changing.
I agree. RIT is doing great. Before I came back here to work, I was working at the health department in the city of Pittsburgh. And so I remember very much what it's like as to be the only deaf person. And I came to RIT long story short, I moved here on Saturday, classes started on Monday. So it was chaos. So I had a meeting scheduled for Monday. They asked me if I wanted an interpreter. I'm like, I don't have that. They asked me. That was an amazing experience. And that's one reason why I'm hoping I never have to leave NTID. I've become so spoiled as a deaf person. Racially, all higher ed kind of struggles with that because, historically, higher education has been available to certain groups of people. And I'm enjoying watching that change. I've been here for 7 years. I started teaching in Pittsburgh. So altogether, just under 10 years of teaching, I'm seeing so much change, especially with the genderqueer community. There's so many more now. People are so much more brave. And so not just the outwardly obvious appearance, but also the internal. I'm seeing more students being more confident with that. I love that. I hope it continues because, like Sarah said, more politicians who are more diverse, I think wonderful things will happen. Higher education will continue to accept more, and hopefully it will be a different experience in 10, 20 years.
Thank you both. All right, this next question is presenting a theoretical or hypothetical situation. In the context you are meeting someone for the first time. So what is one thing that person can do to embrace your diversity? And what is something a close friend can do?
I love this question. Joanna, I hope you don't mind when I say out loud that you are my close friend and you know it. So you from a personal standpoint, I see the supportive things that you say to people online, and you just validate people. When you're a close friend, acknowledging that someone else is the expert of their own experience. And just continuing to get to know someone. If your friend gives you new information about them, try not to make judgments right away and try to learn and educate yourself. And it can be a tough balance. And when you're meeting someone you don't know, I just think, and it's really hard, by the way, it's not like I think I'm so perfect that I do this all the time, because we're all fighting what our brains categorize things on purpose. It is a function that sometimes serves us well. Sometimes it really does not. So when you're meeting anyone you don't know, just remembering inside the back of your head that no matter what that person looks like, you don't know gender until someone else tells it to you. You don't know their experiences just because they appear to fit in a particular category. So I don't know. I think it's important for people to educate themselves about how our society is cisgender normative, heterosexual normative, and I'm sort of staying in my lane with the gender stuff, but this type of thing applies to many different areas. It's important that you educate yourself outside of your own experience. You don't have to be an expert and know every single category of asexual ways of being or something necessarily. You don't have to be an expert, but I do think that we have a responsibility to each other to look at how the world around us is shaped, and our perspectives get shaped, and where we need to let some additional light in and try to take a few steps back or look at it from somebody else's perspective, or that type of thing. That's a good question. Thanks, Joanna.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool question. I had to think for a minute. If I just met someone, I like finding common ground, like I said before, finding something we have in common that's not just simple appearances. Oh, you're Asian, I'm Asian. Okay, great, but something more personal. Maybe we have similar interests or something like that, just to get that bond of humanity that connects everyone. For my close friends, in my family, my immediate family, we celebrate the days that myself and my two younger brothers arrived from South Korea. We call them airplane days. So today, February 17th, is actually 26 years since my youngest brother arrived. So I have to text him this morning. But it really means a lot when people outside my family remember mine. And my best friend, she lives in Seattle. We haven't lived in the same city since we were 13. So, but every March 16th, I get a text from her. And that just really means a lot, remembering that day as special and not calling it my birthday. It's the day I arrived from South Korea. So that really means a lot.
Thank you. We've got a few more minutes, so if there are any other questions that anybody wants to ask, I'll also invite Camille and Sarah, if you have questions of each other you want to ask, feel free to also do that.
Oh, I don't know if this is a question, but I really wanted to share with you. My husband and I know we're cis hetero couple. When we were planning our honeymoon, and we picked Provincetown because we wanted Cape Cod, and because it was as far in Massachusetts as we could get, but it's all the way on the tip. So I was told by a friend, lesbian couple. One of them said, P-Town, interesting. I was puzzled. We get there and I was like, oh. Why? So P-Town, if people don't know, they have a very strong LGBT community there. I've been telling everyone what it felt like as a cis couple holding hands, walking along the boardwalk in the minority. Most people were not cis couples. And then when the sun sets, the drag queen come out, oh, it's a party every night. We were there for a week. It was just the most wonderful experience. I loved it so much. And I didn't want to take over your time, but I really wanted to let you know that being part of your culture for just a few nights really still, yeah, that meant a lot.
I think that's really cool. Thanks, Camille. And that, it fits in with the joy piece, right? Like, it's not all trauma. Human beings are living human lives, and some aspects of American culture can be so restrictive. It's not just America by any means, and it's, when you get granular, it's not every American. But the restrictions on who you can be, how you can express yourself, and the fear. There's so much fear, like, and you just about remembering all these different things, like, you probably know transgender people that you don't know are transgender. and I mean that in just about every sense, really. You just trying to stay open and really thinking about how much we can gain from allowing a rich and diverse human experience. And instead of focusing on, what's weird or out of line or calling things disabilities, that the people living those experiences do not have a disability. That kind of perspective, and in case it wasn't obvious, I am talking about deaf culture. Not being able to hear is not a disability. So I just think trying to remain open. And when we remain open, it can get scary. Sometimes people think, people go dark and they think about all these bad things and whatever. Well, you have to identify what is the actual harm. Is there a real harm? Are you harming society? Am I harming society by being me? No, that's not where the harm lies. Refusal to acknowledge people like me causes a great deal of very real harm and violence and death. So, not to make it dark, sorry. But really, it's difficult. Life is incredibly complex and situations are not cookie cutter. So, it definitely, I certainly appreciate how difficult things can be, but really, and it's work, I mean, if you're not putting in any work to understand things outside of yourself, then you won't, you won't see that, the real harm kind of thing.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, I'm gonna do a last call for any additional questions before we end today's session. Any other questions? All right, I don't see any. I see a thank you in the chat box. All right, well, I thank you all for joining today's episode of What's Your Diversity? I want to thank Camille and Sarah for agreeing to participate and share their wonderful positive stories, as well as be vulnerable in this digital space with people they may not know. So yes, I thank you, and I hope to see some of you at our next session, which will be on March 3rd. That one will be at 9 a.m. and which is early, a little early for us. But that one, we're focused on engaging our global campuses. So that's why it's at 9 a.m. So folks in other parts of the world can participate. And for some of them, it's 9 p.m. at night. So I'm always grateful for their participation. All right. If not, we'll see you at the following meeting, which will be focused on RIT Rochester community. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, interpreters.